Hi, I'm Jason and welcome to my workshop. I've got a little problem here. Well, it was a little problem. It's gotten pretty big, and that's my offcut and scrap collection. This stuff might not look very valuable, but there's actually quite a bit of stuff here that I'll use someday to build a jig or maybe part of a larger furniture project. But I'm tripping on it all the time, so I've got to find a way to deal with it. Now, I spent a lot of time online looking at people's versions of offcut bins and other things like that. YouTube and Pinterest, you name it. The best thing I found was something created by Woodsmith Shop. They have a TV show on PBS and they have a YouTube channel, which I'll put a link to in the description below. They also have plans you can download, which I did. So my version will be based largely on theirs. I may change it just a little bit, but by and large, it's gonna look and function just like this one. So let's get started. So if I were building this exactly from the plans, I'd use about 1.5 sheets of plywood. But I like to cut my pieces about 1 or 2 inches oversized. That way, if I decide I want to use rabbets and dados, I've got that option. They call for mostly glue and screws and butt joints in the plans, but I like to overbuild things. So here we go. Whenever I'm cutting full 4x8 sheets of plywood like this, I avoid the table saw and I go right to my track saw. It's just a lot easier and I get more accurate cuts that way. Another reason I like to cut the pieces oversized is because sometimes when you're building from plans, believe it or not, you'll find a mistake or 2 in there, and this helps cover you a little bit. Also, when I'm building from plans, it's good to wait to cut everything to final size and do it as you need it for each piece, because sometimes joinery offsets can throw things off a little bit. Boy, I could really use a scrap bin right now. Now I'll cut some of the smaller pieces to size at the table saw. And I'll cross-cut them to length at the miter saw. Okay, here's some basic anatomy from the Woodsmith Shop's plans. They're calling for a bin back, a bin front. There'll be 3 dividers in the back, 2 dividers in the front, and then some 1/2-inch steel EMT to kind of hold all the small offcuts. So here's a view looking from the top down, the bin back, the bin front, and this is the EMT. I'm going to take care of these 3 dividers in the bin back first. So I want them to be evenly spaced. They give me some measurements here, but I trust mine more than any plans. So there are a few different ways to get even spacing. I'll show you one easy way that I like to use. So I know that this piece of plywood is 39¼ long, and I'll take this ruler, it's a long ruler, I'll take the corner of the ruler, put it to the corner of the plywood, and then I'll tip the right side of the ruler up until I get to 40 inches. And the reason I do it to 40 inches is because that's easily divisible by 10. And I need 3 dividers. So once everything lines up, I just make a mark at 10, a mark at 20, and a mark at 30. Now to check that I did everything right, I'll just take this square and make sure that each one of these is evenly spaced. There's 1, 2, 3. All right, so I'm ready to start routing some dados for the dividers. I've got my straight edge clamped down to my workpiece. I've got the router set up with a plywood cutting bit. Now, a plywood cutting bit is slightly undersized from 3/4 inch, which is what most plywood you get from the home center tends to be. So I've got that mounted in here, and since the router is on the right side of the fence, I'll be pushing the router away from me. That'll help hold it tight to the fence while I'm routing. So here we go. For the last cut, I had to move the router to the left side of the fence. So I'll be pulling the router toward me, again, to keep it tight to the fence. Now I'm routing the dados for the front dividers. I used a different method to get the equal spacing for those. If you want to see how I did it, watch the last video I did on how to build a chisel rack. Perfect. Let's give this piece a test fit in that dado, and that fits perfectly. Love when that happens. All right, so we're doing a little bit of dry fitting just to make sure all these parts and pieces go together. So let me walk you through the anatomy again. So this is the front part of the bin, this is the rear part of the bin, and we've got 3 rear dividers sitting in Dados, top and bottom, and these 2 front dividers, and those also sit in Dados. So we're going to work on the side pieces next. Now, of course I could just glue and screw with butt joints. That's plenty strong, but I like to overbuild, like I said. And it's also a great way to practice joinery when you're working on shop projects, because if you mess up, it's not the end of the world, it's a shop project, right? So what I'm gonna do is, to accept this rear part of the bin, I'm gonna mill a rabbet in the side, and then to accept this front board, I'm gonna mill a dado right here. So it's back to the router. So I've taken the router bit out of my handheld router and I've put it here in the router table because these side pieces are kind of narrow and it's just easier to do here on the router table than it is with a straight edge. For the rabbet, I bury the bit in the fence and I sneak up on the cut a little bit at a time until it fits just right. So yesterday I finished up the dados and rabbets on the 2 sides of the bin, and the next thing I want to do is get rid of these sharp corners near the top front edge of both sides, and also these 2 dividers near the front of the bin. So the way I'll do that is a way that Woodsmith Shop, the TV show, suggested, and that's to create a template out of some 1/4-inch material. I already cut the radius, it's a 7-inch radius, and I put some double-sided tape on the back. So I'll stick that to the front edge of each of these pieces. And I'll take most of this material off using my bandsaw, and then using a flush cutting bit on my router table, I'll get a nice smooth curve on each of the pieces. And now, using the same template, I'll drill some holes and counter bores using a 3/4-inch Forstner bit. I'll show you what those are for in just a minute. So I promised I'd tell you what these holes were for. I've got counter bores on the left and right side and through holes in these 2 dividers, and that's to accept this EMT, electrical metal tubing, also called steel conduit if you go to the hardware store and want to know what to ask for. So one end of the tubing will go into a counter bore on the left side. It'll run through these through holes in the 2 dividers, and then it'll terminate on the other side in the counter bore right here. So that's just so I can see the shorter pieces easily, see what kind of wood I've got in the front of the bin. And also I just think it looks really cool. So good idea, Woodsmith Shop. So now I've got to do some sub-assembly here. I'm going to glue this all up, and I need to start thinking about how I'm going to attach this to the bottom. But before I do any of that, I want to knock these sharp corners off using my trim router and a roundover bit. It's a lot easier to do it right now than before I start gluing everything up. So I really want to get this project done, and I don't feel like breaking out the clamps or drilling pilot holes and driving screws. So I'm going to use a method that Norm Abram used on the New Yankee Workshop for years and years. And that's just to lay some glue in each of the dados and rabbets, put the dividers in, and then I'm just going to tack everything in place with some 1-inch brads, just toenailing on each side. And the brads will just hold everything in place until the glue dries. So this is the front. There's the front. This is the back side of the front piece. So I've got glue in the dados. And now what I need to do is set these 3 dividers into the dados that I now have glue in. So I might have to futz with it a little bit. And the nail gun just fits. So the glue up went together mostly smoothly, a couple little hiccups. There were a couple of tight spots where I couldn't quite get the nail gun in there, so I had to adapt on the fly. Also, there were some twists in part of the plywood The plywood was utility grade from a home center. You've just got to expect that sometimes with that kind of plywood. So I put the conduit in here just so you can kind of get an idea of what this is going to look like when it's done. I left it long on the sides because I need to make a couple of rough cuts initially and then kind of sneak up on the cut just to make sure that it fits into that counter bore that'll be here on the side piece. So we'll do that next. A little bit of play, but perfect. All right, let's glue that on. Hey, look, a different color sweatshirt again. Well, this isn't my day job. I have a day job that keeps me pretty busy, so I'm lucky if I can get a couple hours in the shop here and there. It is what it is. So sorry if that distracts you, but hopefully we're good. Okay, so it's Saturday, so I've got plenty of time to work on this. I should be able to finish it today. I started this morning by cutting this bottom piece for the bin that the casters will attach to. And I have a 1/4 inch reveal on the front and also on the sides. I think it's more just for looks than anything else. So we'll go with that. And I've been thinking about the best way to attach this. I'm gonna go low tech. I'm just gonna make some marks all around the bin where I know I've got plywood to drill and screw up through. So we'll do that now. So what I'm actually doing is I'm tracing around all the plywood pieces from the top. And so what that will allow me to do is drill my pilot holes from the top, and then I can flip this thing upside down and I can make my counter bores for my screws on the bottom. It's a lot easier this way. Now with everything marked out, I'm drilling for some 1.5 inch screws. And so I don't drill through my workbench, I've got the plywood propped up on some scrap pieces of 2x4. And now I'll drill my countersinks on the back. And now I'll drill up through the bin from below and I'll drive some screws. All right, so now we're ready to build this back compartment that will hold larger pieces of plywood. So Woodsmith calls for 4 nailers at the bottom and a shelf that sits on top of that. And then this large back piece, which will get fastened to the nailers. So we'll cut those pieces next. Now I'm just gluing and nailing the shelf parts together. And I'm not too worried about the spacing of the filler blocks because you'll never see any of this. And now just like before, I'll drill some pilot holes from above, countersink from below, and screw from underneath. All right, we're getting close. I've got some glue on the shelf and the filler pieces, and now it's time to put the back on. So I set that down carefully, check left and right. And I've already drilled and countersunk for screws, but to just hold it in place while I'm screwing and to keep everything where it needs to be, I'm just going to add a couple nails. Okay, maybe more than a couple. And now I'll just screw it in place. Now I'm just knocking off as many sharp corners as I can using an 1/8 inch roundover bit on my trim router. So I almost forgot something before I put the casters on, and that's to install these hardwood cleats at the bottom of each of these front bins. This is 1.5 inch red oak, but you could use any kind of hardwood. And I was trying to figure out how I wanted to attach these at the bottom. I could certainly glue and screw from underneath, but then it would leave the ends unsupported. So I broke out my pocket hole jig, and I put a couple pocket holes on each end, and then it's a snug fit going into each of the front bins. And you want to set them back 1/2 inch from the front of this bottom piece of plywood. And I've got just enough room to drive the screws if I use this really small drill driver that I got for Christmas, by the way. I should be able to hold it upside down and drive just like that. Wish me luck. right. Done. So last part of the process, time to put the casters on. The plans called for 4-inch casters, but 5-inch were just what I found at the home center. And they're also a little beefier, so I don't mind using them. I'm attaching them with some old 1-inch drywall screws that I've been trying to get rid of forever, frankly. And I also have these washers that are made for screws with tapered heads. They have a little countersink in the middle of them so that everything sits nice and flush when you drive them. Well, it's only been about 30 minutes since I finished building this thing. I've already filled it up. So either I've got to go through my scraps and get rid of some stuff, or I've got to build 2 more of these. And while it was a fun project to build, it wasn't that much fun. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and ring the bell. You'll get notifications whenever I have a new video up. And if you want to get the plans for this, go to Woodsmith Shop's YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can download those for yourself. We'll see you soon.